I've got a few things that I feel that it's important that I communicate this morning. So just to say, if you don't know me, my name's Barney, and I have the privilege of leading the team here at Gateway. And I looked at my diary. This was originally chalked down as just a worship morning, and I then looked at the next few weeks, and I realised there's a few things that we need to communicate coming up in the season that we're in as a church. And so I'm not going to speak for long today, or as long as I would do normally. I'll probably rabbit on a little bit. But I do want to say a few things this morning. And I'm going to speak in a second. I'm just going to point towards John 10. But if you're not here this morning, if you're not here this morning, if you are here this morning, you don't know Jesus. Maybe you're here, you've been invited along, maybe your mum's dragged you along to church this morning. Jesus, in John 10, there's the book of John in the New Testament, the Gospel of John. Jesus gives this kind of speech, and he talks about himself being like a shepherd. He says, I'm a good shepherd. I'm not like a bad shepherd. In fact, I'm a good shepherd. I look after my sheep. And he says that his sheep know him and they know his voice. And as Christians, we believe we're Jesus' sheep. And Jesus is our good shepherd. And Jesus makes this claim. He says that I have come that you might have life, and life in all its fullness. And I just felt like I was going to mention this in about a minute's time, but let me start with this. If you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus, Jesus' call to you is that if you come to him, you will experience life in its fullness. So there's lots of things that our culture tries to teach us about what's good and what's great and how you can be happy and successful. And, that goes from like maybe money or, relationships. It might even go to kind of just that kind of sense of knowing yourself, yeah? So lots of things on the radio and, at the moment about knowing who you are and, getting therapy because it'll help you discover the real you. And those things are good, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, our culture teaches us that those things are going to be what the things that make you happy and successful and feel fulfilled. And Jesus says, actually, no, I've come that you might have life and life in all its fullness. And so if you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus, I just really feel that you need to hear that this morning, that you're not here by accident. And that Jesus wants to tell you this morning that you're here because he wants to tell you that he's come that you might have life in all its fullness. Now, all its fullness doesn't mean that you're going to be financially rich. Some Christians teach that, and it's dreadful. It doesn't mean that you're going to be financially rich or financially blessed. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in life. But what it does mean is as you follow Jesus and his way for your life, you will know a richness of joy, of peace, of love. The more you follow Jesus, the more these things start to feel like in your heart and your soul. Now, I testify to this as somebody who's been a Christian over 20 years, that the more I follow Jesus, the more I know a sense of fulfillment in life. There's nothing else that satisfies the way that Jesus does. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm not sure I believe this guy. But I can only testify to that in my own life, that as I follow Jesus, the things that the world offers me are not I'm not interested in them. I'm just interested in Jesus. And so that's the first thing. Because look, this is the vision that Jesus gives us, that we might have life and life in all its fullness. And as Christians, that's the vision that we have. We want to follow Jesus' way for us. And his vision for us as Christians is the foundation of who we are as a church family. And so as a church family, we have like a vision statement. And our vision statement is this, that we're going to be a church family that loves God, that loves each other, and that makes disciples of other people. And this comes from Jesus' teaching to us as Christians. And so in the book of Matthew, Jesus says that he gets quizzed by these Pharisees and they're trying to trick him. They say, what's the greatest commandment in the Old Testament? And he quotes back the Old Testament to them. He says, well, look, the greatest commandment is that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he says the second one is just like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. He says in those two things sums up everything you can read in the Old Testament. Love God with everything you have and love each other. Elsewhere in the New Testament, he says, the world will know you're my disciples through the love that you have for each other. So as Christians and as a church, two of the three foundations who we are as a people is that we want to be a people who love God with everything that we have. And we just had an offering, and that's part of it. We give money to God. We believe that as we give here, we're not giving it to the church, we're giving it to God because we just want to give him all that we have. because we love God and we want to serve him and we want more of him in our lives. And secondly, we want to love each other in the same way. It says in the book of Acts that when the church started to love one another, there wasn't a needy person among them. We live in a culture of so much need, don't we? The church is meant to demonstrate God's heart for you. That if you were in our community, I hope that those people in our community know that there is a generosity of heart towards one another here. And I would hope that it means that people are without need amongst us. You should encounter that. And the third thing is that we need to be a people who make disciples, who go out and demonstrate what Jesus is like. We're loving God, we're loving one another, and we're also leading other people into that same process. And Jesus says in Matthew 28, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Let me put all this another way. Gateway Church, we are called to be a presence-filled family on mission. So we're called to be a people who want God's presence because we love him. The presence of God over everything we do. We've had people come and testify this morning to what God's doing in their lives. We don't believe that God is a dead God. We don't believe that Jesus is a historical figure. We believe that Jesus is ruling and reigning at the right hand of the Father in heaven. And we want to encounter his presence when we meet together on Sundays. We're called to be a presence-filled family on mission. For too long, there is a quote by this guy called Leonard Ravenhill. It's a really cool name. It's better than Barney Hall. Leonard Ravenhill. I'm joking. He says this: the church right now has more fashion than passion, is more pathetic than prophetic, is more superficial than supernatural. We don't want Gateway Church to be like that. We want Gateway Church to be passionate. I don't care. Look at me. I'm not cool. We're not about being cool. We're not about singing the latest songs that you might have heard on Spotify. We're not about that. We want to be passionate about Jesus and his gospel. And that might mean that we sing songs from hundreds of years ago or songs that were written last week, but we're not about the latest fashion. We want to know Jesus. We don't want to be pathetic, but instead we want to be prophetic. What does that mean? That means we speak God's truth back to the culture that speaks lies. And thirdly, we want to be supernatural. We've just heard stories this morning about God healing people. We believe in a supernatural God. God is doing something in the church in the UK at the moment. And I get the privilege of talking to other church leaders. I'm from Leicester, so Leicester is the best city in all of England with the worst football team. And there's a church in Leicester called Cromer Church, and last year they had 350 people become Christians. And the year before that, they had 300 people become Christians. So in just over 2 years, they actually had over 700 people become Christians in just the last 2 years. Our friends at King's Arms Church up in Bedford have seen 60 people become Christians in the last month. It's amazing. We were at St Aldate's before Christmas, which is a Church of England church in Oxford. And the pastor there spoke about a move of God that's happening among their young people. They've got people queuing up to get into the church building for their meetings. And he told a story about these 3 teenagers who've all started attending the Alpha course there, which is a course you can find out about Jesus, and they've all become Christians. And they all know each other from school. They turned up to their 6th form together on one day. They'd all had dreams the night before. 2 of them had seen angels in their dreams, and the other had had a man come to her in her dream and told her that she needed to read the Bible. And she said in her dream, to this person in her dream, I don't have a Bible at home. We don't own a Bible in our house. She then woke up to find a Bible open by her bedside table at the book of Luke. She says she goes to church and she becomes a Christian. These things are not happening like 100 years ago. These are not in a storybook. I've spoken to the people who have. Does that make sense? I want you to know that God is doing something in our nation. We want to see God save hundreds, not tens here. We've seen 6 people saved since Christmas. That's amazing. We celebrate God for each person that comes to faith. But we want hundreds to know Jesus and come to him. There's a book called Prophetic Integrity by R.T. Kendall, who used to be the minister at Westminster Chapel. And at the end of this book, he just makes this observation. He says, I'm convinced that a major awakening is coming. It will be global, potentially beginning in Britain. And I actually think we're starting to see that. In the church, there's an awakening taking place. I want to see God move in my lifetime over Ashford. Amen. I want to see people saved, so does Jenny, discipled, sent out. I want to see people plant and lead churches. There are over 132,000 people living in the greater Ashford area, according to the 2021 census. And 62,000 people apparently identify as Christians, whilst 50,000 people say they have no religion. Well, I can tell you, because I know most of the church leaders in Ashford, that we do not have 60,000 people attending church meetings on a Sunday morning. So this shows us something really significant. There are at least 50,000 people who need to hear the gospel, and there are at least another 60,000 people that need to be envisioned for the church. Like, that's a huge task. And that's the task that God's given you, and he's given me. If you live in Ashford, we have been called to the mission field here in Ashford. This is our mission field, and we share that mission with all the other churches in Ashford. But God, as our leader, has given us a unique mission. And over the last few months, over the last year, God's been really speaking to us through a few prophetic words. And let me just just show those to you, because we believe that God's given us a unique mission in this town. And the first prophetic word that we've had twice was about we would be a church of many gateways. So in ancient cities, they had walls around the cities and they had gates leading into the city. And we've had several prophetic words. That's when God speaks to us, saying that we're going to be a church of many gateways. I'm aware that there are lots of communities in Ashford, there are lots of estates in Ashford where people have never been outside the estate. They don't own cars, they don't travel outside their estates. How are we going to reach them with the gospel unless we go to them with the gospel? God's calling us to be a church of many gateways. Secondly, I just really like the picture of the octopus, so I put that up. We're called to be, this was a prophetic word. Somebody came and spoke to me about a conference I was at last year. I see Gateway Church being like an octopus. And it's going to have reach not only into different parts of Ashford, but into different structures and organisations in Ashford, that we're going to have reach into places of authority. And lastly, that we're like a flock of geese, that geese do this thing where they kind of diverge and then they come back together again in unity. So we're united, but we're also divergent, was the prophetic word. God is calling us to be a presence-filled family on mission to all of Ashford, a church of many gates, like an octopus, flying like geese. And so look, as a leadership team, when we started the third meeting at Willsborough Junior School, this was an obedience to God's leading over us as a church community. And since I began leading the team here in 2019, you come in this morning, we're almost full in here now. We've got another meeting here and one over at Willsborough now. Since I began leading the team here, we thought the next sensible thing for us was to build a big building here, a big auditorium. But we just feel that as we've started to hear God speak and speak these things over us, we need to pause that process and lean into what God is doing and his direction. You should never be led by a Christian leader's good ideas. You should be led by what God is saying. We need to follow the Holy Spirit and what he's showing us. And so this is all a call and response to what God has been speaking over us. And so in that, we need to then re-gear how we operate as a church to be a church that meets at multiple times in multiple locations. And one of the key things that we've been doing behind the scenes now for a while is to try and work out how we can have one pastor who oversees each of our three meetings. So a pastor who oversees this meeting, a pastor who oversees the 9 a.m. meeting, and a pastor who oversees the 10 a.m. at Willsborough. And so at the moment, our pastors are myself, Jazz, Becca, and Sam. And so we feel that what we've been trying to do is move things around so that we can get somebody who's kind of spearheading each meeting in the church. And so in order for us to do that, we've moved some roles around internally. Rachel Budd is going to be moving from her. She does this kind of bit. Those of you who know Rachel, you'll know her mainly from children's work, but she does admin a day and a half a week. And so Rachel is stepping out of the admin to focus fully on leading our children's ministry. She is so incredibly gifted with children. She loves your children so much. She really does. And she wants them to follow Jesus. And so she's going to be taking that role so that Sam doesn't have to focus on that anymore. And as a result of her doing that, we needed to appoint a part-time administrator. And so you might have seen that advertised. Well, Jenny Ramsey, who used to work in this role a long time ago before I was working for the church here, was successful in that process. And she's going to be taking on the administrator's role from the start of April. That's not my phone, good. It's my ringtone, you got me scared then. And so those two things are going to enable us to free up Sam Kendall's time so that he can lead one of our 3 Sunday meetings. So just so you're all aware of that's what's happening with that. But also we recognise we're going to need to employ another full-time pastor just to make all of this work. And so you might have seen that advert go out as well, and we're in the process of that at the moment. What we're trying to do as a team is be responsible for what God is saying to us. We're trying to model that to you. I'm invested in this. I would not be getting up like I was this morning, cutting communion bread for Willsborough at 7 a.m. in the morning if I didn't believe God had spoken. The people who were over there week by week wouldn't be there if they didn't believe that God had spoken, because it's hard graft when you're doing that every week. We believe that God has spoken to us. And just to encourage you, church, that God is speaking to us and he's leading us in what we're doing. But for all of us, in the season we're in, there's some different ways that we can get involved. And I just want to share these with you as I close, and then we're going to worship before we finish the meeting. But the first thing is this. We're going to have a gift day on the 18th of May. And that's for our church family, so that because what we're going to do is we're not building the additional building outside. We may well do in future, but we're just going to put a pause on that at the moment. So therefore, we're going to try and get some things done here, including opening up the cafe area into the lounge. And so we'll share more about that in due course. We want to fundraise for the things that God's calling us to do in the Willsborough estate. And we're also I haven't spoken on this morning, but we're going to share some videos coming up. Our friends Sharo and Alexis are a couple who are out in northern Iraq. They lead a charity there called Hope for Communities. They're doing some amazing work for Jesus there, and so we want to bless them with some money as well. So that's the first thing. But also with that as well, I just encourage you to review your regular giving, those of us who do give to God here regularly. So I've noticed that I realised myself, I hadn't looked at my standing order in a couple of years, and I realised that actually my pay's gone up, thank you. My pay's gone up a little bit. And so therefore I was able to give more. I was like, I can give a bit more money. So we're just encouraging everybody to go through that process as we are in this season at the moment. Secondly, this is getting full in here already. There are people in this, I love this, that I look out this room now, and I know there are some people here who are guests this morning, but also there's people here who are coming every week, and we've not met each other yet. And I really love that. I love the fact that we're getting to a point as a church now where we're so big that as long as we know people and we feel part of the community, it doesn't matter that we don't need to know everybody. But we're looking for 10 to 20 people to join the work in Willsborough. And so what I'm going to just say to you is if you come here regularly, maybe on a week that you're not serving, why not come over and visit Willsborough and just pray, God, would you show us whether this could be right for us or for yourself as an individual? We're going to plan to put youth work in place by May there as well, if that might twist anybody's arm. So that's that one. And then lastly, this has come through several times this morning. Can we have the band back up? Because I'll finish on this. Okay. Lastly, God is calling us to be a people of prayer, and we are not a people of prayer. There's a church up in North London called Jubilee Church, led by a guy called Tope Coalesso. His sons are the Ezra Collective, if you know the band. And he leads a really big church that's part of our network there. And I was at an event recently, and he was talking about their prayer meetings. They have 600 people at their early morning prayer meetings. We get 6. Yeah? It's a challenge for you. I was so jealous. Because they are so many people praying as a church now that they get their young people turning up to the building to pray in the morning. They've put on breakfast for them before they go to school. We have 2 prayer meetings a week online. Why not join us? You don't have to pray out loud. You can just be muted, have your camera off. But why not join us as we pray for a move of God in our nation? And then secondly, I feel that we're in a season we need to push in on prayer again. And so 7 to 8 p.m. from Wednesday the 23rd of April, every Wednesday night, apart from the half term, to the 16th of July, I'm going to be here every Wednesday night. I'm going to be praying for revival. It would be great for you to join me because we want to see God move. Jesus says, I've come that they might have life and life in all its fullness. There are people living life in Ashford who are not living life in all its fullness. And I want to see them encounter Jesus. So my encouragement to you is to get involved with us as a church. If you're here visiting this morning, hopefully you can see I'm passionate. I love Jesus. We love his kingdom. We want to see his church grow and multiply throughout the nations of the world. Why don't you just join me as we finish the morning in worship?